It was supposed to be a quiet Friday night, the kind where you kick back, relax, and forget about the chaos of the week. I had just finished dinner, a simple meal of grilled chicken and mashed potatoes, and settled into my favorite recliner with a cold beer in hand. The TV was on, but I wasn't really paying attention. My mind was drifting, thinking about random things like weekend plans and whether I needed to stop by the grocery store. That's when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. Seeing it was my sister Mia's number, I picked up without hesitation. "Hey Mia," I said casually, expecting one of her usual calls. You know, maybe she'd complain about work or vent about another bad date. She's always been the emotional one in the family, quick to laugh, but also quick to cry. But this time, her voice didn't sound like her at all. It was shaky, panicked, like she was holding back tears. "Ryan. Oh God, Ryan, you need to come over right now, she blurted out, her words tumbling over each other. Her tone sent a chill down my spine. Something was very wrong. "What's going on? What happened?" I asked, sitting up straighter. My heart started pounding as I braced myself for whatever she was about to say. They destroyed it," she choked out, her voice breaking. "They tore it down, Ryan. Everything's gone." I froze, gripping the phone tighter. "Destroyed what? Who tore down what?" "My house," she cried, her voice cracking with emotion. "That woman from the HOA. She called some crew, and they bulldozed it. They didn't even tell me. They just showed up and started tearing it apart. It's all gone." My stomach dropped like a rock. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My little sister, the one who used to bake me cookies after Little League games, the one I promised to protect no matter what, was sitting somewhere crying because someone had taken a wrecking ball to her life. Wait, slow down," I managed to say, trying to wrap my head around what she was telling me. "Are you saying someone demolished your house? Like literally knocked it down?" "Yes," she wailed. "And they didn't give me any warning. They didn't ask. They just came in and destroyed everything. All my stuff. It's all gone." Anger surged through me, hot and uncontrollable. Whoever this person was, whoever gave the order to do something so cruel, they had no idea who they were messing with. Because I wasn't just Ryan Carter, protective older brother. I was Chief of Police Ryan Carter. And if there's one thing I can't stand, it's people abusing their power to hurt others. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, I told her firmly, grabbing my jacket and keys. As I sped toward her neighborhood, my mind raced. What kind of person does something like this? Who thinks it's okay to demolish someone's home without giving them a chance to explain or fix whatever issue there might have been? When I turned onto her street, the sight that greeted me made my blood boil even more. Where her cozy little cottage once stood, there was nothing but rubble. Splintered wood, twisted metal, shattered glass. It was like a war zone. Yellow caution tape surrounded the mess, fluttering in the breeze like some sick joke. And there, sitting on the curb wrapped in a blanket, was Mia. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and puffy. She looked completely broken. "Oh, sweetheart." I crouched beside her, pulling her into a tight hug. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." She said I broke the rules, Maya whispered hoarsely, barely able to get the words out. Something about the roof needing repairs, and I hadn't filed the right paperwork. "But I swear, Ryan, I sent them all the forms weeks ago. I did everything they asked." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my emotions in check. This wasn't just some minor disagreement over neighborhood guidelines. This was destruction, plain and simple. And someone was going to pay for it. The sight of Mia's demolished house left me speechless for a moment. I stood there, staring at the wreckage, trying to process how something like this could happen in broad daylight. It wasn't just a house, it was her home. A place filled with memories, furniture she'd saved up for, photos, and little knickknacks that made it hers. And now it was all gone, reduced to a pile of debris. Mia sat on the curb, clutching the blanket tightly around her shoulders. She looked so small, so fragile, like the weight of everything had crushed her spirit. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march up to whoever was responsible and demand answers. But first, I needed to stay calm for Mia's sake. She needed me to be strong right now. "Okay," I said, crouching down beside her again. "Let's start from the beginning. Tell me exactly what happened." She took a deep breath, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "It started with a letter from the HOA. They said my roof didn't meet their standards because it needed repairs. I got the notice a few weeks ago, but I already submitted all the paperwork they asked for. I even hired a contractor to fix it. They were supposed to start next week." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "And then today, while I was at work, I got a call from one of my neighbors. She said there was a crew here, tearing down my house. By the time I got back, it was too late." Her voice cracked as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "They didn't even warn me, Ryan. No phone call, no nothing. They just showed up and destroyed everything." My fists clenched involuntarily. How could anyone justify doing something like this, even if there had been some kind of violation? And from what Mia was saying, she'd done everything required to comply. This level of retaliation was beyond cruel. It was malicious. "Do you know who gave the order?" I asked, my tone sharp but controlled. Mia hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Her name's Patricia Langston. She's the head of the HOA here. Everyone calls her HOA Karen behind her back because she's always nitpicking and threatening fines. But I never thought she'd actually do this." Patricia Langston. The name echoed in my mind, each syllable fueling my anger. Whoever she was, she clearly believed she was untouchable. Maybe she thought throwing her weight around would scare people into submission. But she hadn't counted on one thing: me. "Stay here," I told Mia firmly. "I'm going to figure out what's going on." Before leaving, I snapped a few pictures of the scene with my phone. Evidence might come in handy later. Then I walked over to a neighbor who was standing nearby, watching silently. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Hey," I said, approaching him casually. "Did you see what happened here?" He glanced at me nervously before nodding. "Yeah, I saw the crew show up. They'd brought a bulldozer and just started tearing the place apart. No warning or anything." "Did anyone talk to them? Ask why they were doing it?" The man shook his head. "No, but I heard one of them mention something about an HOA order. That's all I know." I thanked him and headed back to Mia. Her eyes were wide with fear and exhaustion. "What are we going to do, Ryan? I don't have the money to rebuild. Everything I own is gone." "We'll figure it out," I assured her, though I wasn't entirely sure how yet. What I did know was that Patricia Langston was about to learn the hard way that no one messes with my family, not on my watch. As I drove away from Mia's ruined home, my mind raced. This wasn't just about rebuilding a house. It was about holding someone accountable for their actions. Patricia Langston thought she could hide behind her title and rules, but she was about to face someone who played by a different set of guidelines altogether. And trust me, she wouldn't like the results. The next morning, I decided to pay Patricia Langston a visit. If she thought she could demolish someone's home and walk away unscathed, she was about to learn otherwise. I didn't bother calling ahead. I wanted this confrontation to be face-to-face. She needed to see the person she was dealing with. Her house wasn't hard to find. It sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, larger and more extravagant than any other home in the neighborhood. The perfectly manicured lawn looked like it belonged on a magazine cover, and the flower beds were arranged with precision. Everything about the place screamed wealth and control, which fit what I'd heard about her so far. I parked my car in the driveway and walked up to the front door. Before I even knocked, she opened it, as if she'd been expecting me. Dressed in designer yoga pants and holding a cup of tea, she gave me a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Chief Carter," she said smoothly, extending a manicured hand. "What brings you to Willow Estates today?" I ignored her outstretched hand and stepped closer, letting my badge catch the sunlight. Cut the act, Miss Langston. We both know why I'm here. Her smile faltered for a split second before snapping back into place. Ah, yes. The unfortunate incident involving your sister's property. Such a shame, really. Unfortunate incident. I repeated, incredulous. My voice rose slightly, but I kept it steady. You illegally demolished her house. You can't just send a crew to tear down someone's home without notice or due process. Patricia sighed dramatically, setting her teacup aside. With all due respect, Chief, your sister violated multiple HOA regulations. She ignored repeated warnings, failed to submit proper documentation, and refused to comply with our requests. At a certain point, action had to be taken. Action. I barked, taking another step forward. You think bulldozing someone's house is acceptable action? Do you have any idea what kind of legal trouble you're in right now? She smirked, clearly unbothered by my anger. Legal trouble? From whom? You? Please, Chief Carter. We're simply enforcing the rules designed to maintain the integrity of this community. If your sister couldn't follow them, perhaps she shouldn't have moved here in the first place. Her arrogance made my blood boil. How could she stand there so calmly, acting like what she'd done was justified? Did she really believe her actions were defensible? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Detective Harris, one of my most trusted officers. I stepped aside to take the call, putting some distance between me and Patricia. Yeah, I answered tersely. Boss, we've got something big, Harris said urgently. Turns out Ms. Langston doesn't just have a history with your sister. There are dozens of complaints against her from other residents. People are calling her a tyrant. I glanced back at Patricia, who was inspecting her nails as if nothing was wrong. As if she hadn't just admitted to destroying a family's livelihood. Good, I muttered under my breath, because this isn't over yet. Hanging up, I turned back to her, my expression cold. You might think you're untouchable, Ms. Langston, but trust me, you're not. This isn't just about my sister anymore. It's about everyone you've hurt, everyone you've bullied into submission. And I'm going to make sure you answer for it. For the first time, her confident facade cracked. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with indifference. You'll regret this, Chief Carter. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Oh, I think I do, I shot back. And soon enough, so will everyone else. As I walked away, I felt a surge of determination. Patricia Langston had underestimated me. And that was the biggest mistake she could have made. Back at the police station, I called an emergency meeting with my team. The room buzzed with energy as officers gathered around the conference table, notebooks in hand. Detective Harris stood near the whiteboard, ready to jot down key points. Everyone knew this wasn't just another case. It was personal. And when something hits close to home, you don't hold back. All right, listen up, I began, pacing slowly as I addressed the group. We've got a situation involving Patricia Langston, head of the Willow Estates HOA. She's not just some petty rule enforcer. She's a bully who thinks she's above the law. Yesterday, she ordered the demolition of my sister's house without proper notice or legal authority. But that's not all. According to preliminary reports, there are dozens of other complaints against her from residents in the area. I paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. This isn't about one person anymore. It's about holding someone accountable for years of abuse and intimidation. So here's what we're going to do. We dig deep. Find every piece of evidence that proves she's been abusing her position. Emails, bank records, permits, or lack thereof. We need it all. Detective Harris nodded, flipping open a folder. Boss, we've already started looking into her background. Turns out, she's been using the HOA as her own private dictatorship. Over the past 5 years, she's slapped outrageous fines on homeowners for minor infractions, evicted tenants without following proper procedures, and even threatened lawsuits against anyone who dared challenge her. Officer Ramirez chimed in, holding up a stack of documents. And get this, there's no paper trail for most of these actions. No official records, no court orders. She's been operating completely off the books. If we can prove that, it'll be enough to shut her down for good. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. Good. That's exactly what we need. Start by issuing a cease and desist order to prevent her from taking further action against any resident. Then launch a full investigation into her activities. I want emails, financial statements, anything that connects her to these illegal operations. Leave no stone unturned. But boss, Ramirez interjected hesitantly, glancing around the room. What about backlash? Willow Estates is full of wealthy, influential people. If we go after her too hard, they'll try to bury us. I finished grimly, cutting her off. Let them. No one gets away with trampling over innocent people, not on my watch. This isn't about targeting the rich or causing trouble for the sake of it. It's about justice, for Mia, for the other victims, and for everyone else living under Patricia's thumb. The room fell silent for a moment as my words hung in the air. Finally, Detective Harris broke the quiet. You're right, boss. Let's hit her where it hurts, her reputation and her wallet. By the time we're done, she won't know what hit her. As the team dispersed to begin their work, I stayed behind, staring at the photos of Mia's demolished house pinned to the bulletin board. Anger still simmered inside me, but it was tempered by focus. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about sending a message that no matter how much money or power someone had, they couldn't act like the law didn't apply to them. By the end of the day, we'd uncovered more than I expected. Anonymous tip lines flooded with reports from residents who had suffered under Patricia's reign. Some talked about exorbitant fines for things as trivial as painting their front door the wrong shade of blue. Others described how she'd forced elderly homeowners to sell their properties because they couldn't afford her escalating fees. Each story added fuel to the fire burning inside me. That night, as I sat alone in my office reviewing the evidence, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, yes, but also determination. Patricia Langston had underestimated me, and now she was about to face the consequences. What she didn't realize was that messing with my family wasn't just a mistake, it was a declaration of war. And wars, as I knew all too well, were fought until someone surrendered. Tomorrow, we'd make our move. By Monday morning, the entire neighborhood of Willow Estates was buzzing with news about Patricia Langston. Flyers had been distributed overnight, plastered on lampposts and mailboxes, detailing her alleged abuses of power. Anonymous tip lines were flooded with calls from residents eager to share their stories of harassment and intimidation. Local news outlets caught wind of the scandal, dubbing her HOA Karen in bold headlines that spread like wildfire across social media. Patricia, however, seemed completely oblivious to the storm brewing around her. When I arrived at her house later that day with a warrant for her arrest, she answered the door wearing a silk robe, sipping tea as if nothing was wrong. Her sharp features softened slightly when she saw my badge clipped to my belt. Chief Carter, she greeted me with fake warmth, extending a manicured hand. To what do I owe the pleasure? I ignored her handshake and stepped closer, letting my tone drop into something cold and official. Patricia Langston, you're under arrest for destruction of property, abuse of authority, and multiple counts of harassment. You have the right to remain silent. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. What? This is absurd. You can't possibly think this will stick. Do you have any idea who I am? Oh, I know exactly who you are, I replied, cutting her off. You're the person who thinks she's above the law. The one who destroyed my sister's home without warning or justification. But guess what? The law doesn't care how rich or connected you are. As two officers moved in to handcuff her, Patricia's composure shattered. She began shouting, her voice shrill and panicked. This is ridiculous. I was protecting the integrity of this community. Those rules exist for a reason. Protecting. I shot back, my voice rising slightly. You call demolishing someone's house protecting. You didn't follow due process. You didn't give Mia a chance to fix whatever issue you claim existed. You just bulldozed for life because it suited you. Patricia struggled against the officers, but they held firm. You'll regret this, she screamed, glaring at me. Do you hear me? You'll regret crossing me. I leaned in close, my voice low and steady. No, Miss Langston, you're the one who crossed the line, and now you're going to face the consequences. Neighbors began gathering outside, drawn by the commotion. Some clapped softly as they watched Patricia being led to the squad car, while others cheered openly. For years, they'd lived in fear of her wrath, too afraid to speak up. Now, seeing her handcuffed and humiliated gave them a sense of vindication they hadn't felt in years. As we drove away, Patricia sat silently in the backseat, her face pale and expressionless. It was almost surreal. Just days ago, she'd been untouchable, lording over the neighborhood like a queen. Now she was just another criminal headed to booking. At the station, the investigation intensified. Emails revealed how she'd manipulated HOA funds for personal gain. Bank statements showed unexplained deposits tied to evictions and fines. Contractors admitted to taking orders directly from her, bypassing legal requirements entirely. Every piece of evidence painted a clearer picture. Patricia Langston wasn't just a tyrant, she was a fraud. That evening, I called Mia to update her on everything that had happened. Her voice trembled with relief, and maybe a hint of disbelief. I can't believe it's finally over, she said softly. Thank you, Ryan. I don't know what I would have done without you. You don't have to thank me, I told her gently. I promised Mom and Dad I'd always look out for you, didn't I? Besides, this isn't just about us. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what you did. Hanging up, I stared out the window at the darkening sky. The battle wasn't entirely won yet. There would still be court hearings, lawyers, and probably attempts to discredit the case. But we'd struck a blow where it mattered most. Patricia Langston's reign of terror was over. And as chief of police, I knew one thing for certain. Justice doesn't wait. Not even for someone who thought they were untouchable. With Patricia Langston behind bars and the HOA disbanded, Willow Estates began to breathe again. For years, the neighborhood had lived under a cloud of fear, its residents tiptoeing around rules designed not to protect their community but to control it. Now, with the iron grip of tyranny lifted, people started coming together in ways they hadn't in years. Mia's house became a symbol of hope. Neighbors poured in from all corners of the cul-de-sac, offering help in any way they could. Contractors donated materials, lumber, nails, roofing tiles, while others volunteered their time to rebuild. On weekends, the street buzzed with activity as families worked side by side, hammering nails and painting walls. It wasn't just about constructing a house. It was about rebuilding trust, mending relationships, and creating something stronger than before. One evening, as Mia and I sat on her newly built porch watching the sunset, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. I never thought I'd see this place come back to life, she said softly. And I definitely didn't think so many people cared enough to help. They care now, I replied, smiling. Patricia kept everyone divided, too scared to stand up for themselves. But once you showed them it was possible to fight back, they realized they weren't alone. Mia nodded, clutching a mug of hot cocoa. It's strange, isn't it? A few weeks ago, I barely knew half these people. Now, they feel like family. That's what happens when people unite for a common cause, I said, leaning back in my chair. You've given them something to believe in, a fresh start. But it wasn't just Mia's house that transformed. The entire neighborhood seemed lighter, freer. Without Patricia's constant interference, residents began making changes they'd always wanted but were too afraid to attempt. Gardens flourished with colorful flowers. Front porches sprouted rocking chairs, and laughter echoed through the streets once more. People started hosting block parties, sharing meals, and reconnecting in ways that reminded everyone why they'd moved to Willow Estates in the first place. Still, The scars of Patricia's reign lingered. Some neighbors avoided each other, old wounds slow to heal. Others remained wary, unsure if someone else might step into the power vacuum she'd left behind. But overall, there was a sense of cautious optimism, a belief that things could be better if they worked together. At the station, the case against Patricia continued to unfold. Her trial dominated local headlines, exposing the depths of her corruption. Emails revealed how she'd embezzled HOA funds for personal vacations and luxury purchases. Contractors admitted to falsifying permits at her request, and former residents testified about being forced out of their homes over minor infractions. Each revelation painted a clearer picture. Patricia Langston wasn't just a bully. She was a criminal. When the verdict came down, guilty on multiple charges, it felt like closure for everyone involved. Residents cheered outside the courthouse, holding signs that read "Justice served" and "No more tyrants." Even Mia attended, standing quietly beside me as the judge handed down Patricia's sentence. "She'll never hurt anyone again," Mia whispered, squeezing my arm. "That's all that matters." Back at home, life slowly returned to normal, or rather, a new kind of normal. The battle against Patricia had changed us, teaching lessons we wouldn't soon forget. For me, it reinforced the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. For Mia, it proved that resilience and community can overcome even the darkest times. As I watched her hang curtains in her living room one afternoon, humming softly to herself, I felt a deep sense of pride. She'd lost everything, yet here she was, starting over with courage and grace. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, I knew she, and Willow Estates, would be okay. Because sometimes destruction makes room for something better, something real. In the weeks that followed Patricia Langston's conviction, Willow Estates underwent a transformation, not just physically but emotionally. The neighborhood had been through a storm, and while the scars were still visible, there was an undeniable sense of renewal in the air. It wasn't just about rebuilding houses. It was about rebuilding trust, fostering kindness, and rediscovering what it meant to truly live as a community. For Mia, the experience had changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She'd always been the sensitive one, the type to avoid conflict at all costs. But losing everything, the roof over her head, her belongings, her sense of security, had forced her to confront her own strength. Now, she walked with her shoulders back, her voice steadier, her spirit unshakable. One evening, as we sat on her porch sipping coffee, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Ryan," she began, "I used to think bad things happened because people didn't care enough. But now I realize they happen because good people are too afraid to speak up." I nodded slowly, setting my mug down. "That's true. Fear is powerful. It keeps people silent, lets bullies thrive. But when someone takes a stand, it gives others permission to do the same. And that's what you did for me," she said, smiling softly. "You didn't just fix my house. You reminded everyone here, including me, that we have power when we stick together." Her words stayed with me long after our conversation ended. It wasn't just about Patricia or the HOA anymore. It was about something bigger. People often think justice comes from grand gestures, lawsuits, protests, public outrage. But sometimes it starts small. A phone call, a neighbor lending a hand, a refusal to stay quiet. Those tiny acts of courage can ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one expects. At the station, life returned to its usual rhythm, though the case against Patricia remained a topic of discussion among officers. Detective Harris joked that I'd become a local hero, but I brushed it off. Being chief of police isn't about glory. It's about serving the community, protecting those who can't protect themselves. Still, seeing the smiles on people's faces as they thanked me for standing up to Patricia reminded me why I'd chosen this path in the first place. As for Willow Estates, the neighborhood took steps to ensure nothing like this could happen again. Residents formed a new committee, one focused on collaboration rather than control. Rules existed, sure, but they were fair and designed to enhance the community, not suffocate it. Monthly meetings became opportunities to connect, share ideas, and celebrate milestones instead of dreading fines and penalties. Patricia's downfall served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that unchecked power corrupts even the most seemingly polished individuals. Her obsession with perfection and order had blinded her to basic human decency, alienating those around her until she was left completely alone. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for her. Somewhere along the way, she'd lost sight of what mattered most: relationships, empathy, and the simple joy of belonging. Months later, as Mia unpacked the last of her boxes in her newly rebuilt home, surrounded by friends and loved ones, I realized something important. This fight hadn't just been about revenge or retribution. It had been about redemption. For Mia, for the neighbors, and maybe even for Patricia herself, though she might never see it that way. Standing there, watching my sister laugh as she hummed a wind chime on her porch, I felt a deep sense of peace. Life doesn't always give us happy endings, but every once in a while, it hands us a second chance. For Willow Estates, and for Mia, that second chance had arrived. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the neighborhood, I knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, the best way to fight darkness is to shine a little light.